Welcome to our video series, Hiding Behind the Mask, Conversations on Shame and Narcissism, combining psychological and spiritual perspectives. This is a 12-part series moderated by Dr. Kristen Seavey and featuring the insight of Reverend Robert Hirschfield, Episcopal Bishop of New Hampshire, and Dr. Patricia Gianotti, clinical psychologist and author. Each video segment will begin with a brief introduction by Dr. Seavey, where she will describe an overview of the content material. At the end of each section, a set of questions will appear on your screen. These questions are meant for personal reflection, or you may use the questions as a springboard for small group discussion. We hope you enjoy this series, and now, Dr. Seavey.
In this next segment, Dr. Gianotti gives a definition of narcissistic vulnerability and discusses how chronic unmet needs in childhood may produce underlying feelings of unworthiness.
I think the relationship between shame and narcissism is hand in glove, where you see narcissistic behaviors, even grandiose behaviors. Shame is generally under the surface. Even though individuals may not consciously be aware of feeling ashamed at that given moment. However, when feelings of shame do get triggered, people will generally attempt to distance from these feelings and try to recover by adopting learned defense patterns. And it is through our observation of another person's learned or triggered defense patterns that we come to recognize and actually name someone as narcissistic. So, if we think about how to define narcissism, I would begin by inviting all of you to pause and to think about the roots of narcissism as a condition of vulnerability or injury, rather than thinking about narcissism as a diagnosis or a term of derision. If we remind ourselves that narcissistic behavior is an attempt to cover up one's sense of vulnerability or feelings of inadequacy, it's a much more compassionate approach to a fairly universal condition. Because there isn't any one of us in this room who hasn't suffered from some degree of hurt or injury by the hand of another. So, narcissistic injury is defined as the injury to or the thwarting of the development of our real self, our authentic self, with all of our unique gifts and talents. The degree of narcissistic injury that occurs to any one of us is based on the degree that the real self was ignored, minimized, or prohibited from being present. Therefore, when we speak of narcissism, we need to think about degrees of severity. That's why we talk about understanding narcissistic defenses on a continuum from mild to severe. Yes?
So, all of us have a little bit of narcissism?
So, do all of us have a little bit of narcissism? I think all of us have some degree of woundedness inside of ourselves. Some place inside of ourselves where we don't feel quite as confident or secure, or we feel that we're comparing ourselves to other people, or we don't measure up to other people. And what do we do about that? How do we respond to that internal feeling state when we're comparing ourselves to another? Do we overcompensate? Do we try to belittle the other person so we can feel better? Do we shrink and hide because we feel so insecure that we don't want to speak up for fear of looking not as smart as, not as good as the other person? And I think that all of us go through some period of this at some point in our lives. I think that the teen years are particularly tough on individuals who are growing up and trying to find and carve out a sense of this is who I am. because it's a time when there's a lot of comparison, there's a lot of belittling and bullying, and so we go through periods in our lives where we have to struggle with some degree of a lack of confidence. But people who have been severely relationally damaged, where a parent was cruel or children bullied or children felt unsafe, there's a little bit more of a damage and therefore a little bit more of a need to overcompensate. And I'll get into more of that in a minute.
Thank you.
Okay. So let me continue by saying that narcissistic injury has its roots in early childhood, when the development of the self is thwarted by A, parents not providing enough safety and security, and we call that trauma, or parents not providing enough attention, and that falls more into the category of deprivation, or parents who impose demands on the child to fulfill the parent's own goals and ambitions. So the child is supposed to soothe and satisfy and make up for the parent's own narcissistic insecurity or damage. Now, the outcome of any of these three ways of not being properly parented results in the feeling of a child where they say, there's something wrong with me. There must be something wrong with me. Otherwise, why isn't my parent attending to me, keeping me safe, or accepting me for who I am? Then, in order to distance from feeling unsafe, unworthy, or calling oneself a defective loser, the narcissistic defenses develop in an attempt to hide this insecurity by proving self-worth in order to get love and acceptance. And if these attempts are unsuccessful, because the child continues to fall short of parental expectations or unsafe conditions remain, we either see a withdrawal into defeat and hopelessness on the part of the child, or a lashing out in retaliation, which helps distance from feelings of shame. Both of these outcomes, withdrawal or lashing out, are part of the spectrum of narcissistic damage.
The following questions are meant to stimulate personal reflection or small group discussion. We encourage you to capture a screenshot of these questions and use them for future reference. To order Dr. Gianotti's books, please contact the following websites. And Reverend Hirschfield's book is available through churchpublishing.org.